Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for Saturday, August 11th, 2012. We'll start things off by looking at climatology. Here we are approaching the first and eventually here the second third of August, where things typically get more busy in the tropics climatologically over the last 100 years. You see here the number of hurricanes and storms over the last 100 years increases to a peak around the 10th of September, so we have quite a steep climb to go, and it's mainly a matter of how the atmosphere and the ocean have to be primed and ready to go. And most people look at August the 15th through about October 15th, maybe the 30th, anywhere from 60 to 75 days of the peak of the season, and you can see that showing up pretty well here. You reach the peak on September 10th, then there's another secondary peak around the 15th of October. But then, even though it drops off pretty steeply as you head towards November, you still have fairly high activity, about the same as where we would be right now. The ocean's warm. It takes them a while to cool off. That's why there's this lag that the hurricane season peaks in the fall and not in the middle of the summer. And if you look at that graph as a map and plot everything on a map, you notice there's a definite clustering here, a lot of activity between Africa and the Lesser Antilles, but then nothing in the Central Caribbean until you reach the Northwest Caribbean. The Gulf, Western Atlantic, East Pacific stays active, but this is what we call the Cape Verde season, because a lot of the hits on the United States over the years have come from tropical waves that have had their origins over Africa, most of them developing somewhere in that big oval that I have drawn. So we'll see. I think the next few days are going to be nice and quiet, and that is evidenced here by the tropical weather outlook map from the Hurricane Center. TD7 is no longer. It lost its identifiable low-level circulation thanks to a pretty vigorous search for it by the hurricane hunters that flew down there to check it out and found that it had opened up. So it's a wave of low pressure like this, where the wind flow is this way and that way, but it doesn't complete this way and that way to make a perfect low in the center. Instead, it's just a trough, a wind shift in the atmosphere instead of a closed off low-level center. And then 93L out here not doing much. I expect, though, that as it moves out towards the central Atlantic here, believe it or not, conditions will be more favorable up in the subtropics for this to develop than where it is right now. Interesting, too, because a few days ago, and for those of you that follow hurricane stuff pretty religiously, you remember the models were showing these systems coming off of Africa, and they were barreling westward towards the U.S., some of them developing quite healthy, a few of them running up the East Coast, maybe they were turning near Bermuda, and some of the ensemble runs of those models, a big grouping of models, if you will, were showing hits in Florida and the Gulf Coast. Well, all of that seems to have vanished, and the models, I think, were kind of out to lunch there, which is great news for land interests here on the western side of the basin. Just too negative a set of conditions out here. In fact, we can see that on the water vapor imagery. Very dry air settled in, sinking air, just the lid is still on, so to speak. But in the western basin, in the eastern Pacific here too, a lot more moisture, a lot more instability. It's just a matter of when will something get across that can develop and possibly affect land. Obviously, nobody wants that to happen. And so I think for the next several days, everything will be nice and quiet in the Atlantic anyway. In the eastern Pacific, as I mentioned yesterday, the remnants of Ernesto, remember that came across here. And now the remnants have regenerated in the eastern Pacific, where conditions seem to be pretty ideal. And it'll go on to become probably a hurricane. It'll get the H name, Hector, in the eastern Pacific. Not going to affect land, it doesn't look like, at least as a strong system. The models kind of show maybe a turn of the low-level and mid-level center eventually up here, but the water temperatures are cold enough that it should fizzle out before becoming too much of a problem for the Baja. So the weekend will be very nice, nothing tropical to worry about. A little squally weather moving through the islands there as the remnants of TD7 go by, but think of it as a vigorous tropical wave, which is what it is, and not much more than that. And as I mentioned, I think it'll be nice and quiet for the next several days. All right, so there you have it. There's your update for today. Again, I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. I will have another video blog for you tomorrow.